Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Frank Gore Jr., Southern Miss Golden Eagles, and you listen to FunBelt Podcast.
FunBelt Podcast.
FunBelt Podcast.
FunBelt Podcast.
FunBelt Podcast.
It's just a great conference that is at a point right now where they're, I think, clearly the best group of five conference in the country.
The state of Sunbelt football is the strongest in our history.
And we got to continue to showcase what our league is about.
Three, two, one. Welcome to FunBelt Podcast, Season 3. I forget what episode this is. It doesn't really matter. I'll figure it out later. I am Jeremy Harper with HowRazor.com. With me is Dusty Thibodeau from the Warhawk Report and Shane Metlin from the Daily News Record. Gentlemen, welcome back to another great podcast. I'm glad you're here. You're my favorite people. What's up, dogs?
Jeremy, we forgot to, or we did on the Twitter when we got together in Little Rock, but we forgot to send that picture to Shane directly just so that he could miss us.
I could feel bad. Yeah.
Oh, Shane,
I was not having as much fun as you guys.
We took an epic photo at a nearly empty bar in North Little Rock. It was great. Yeah. You know, the only thing missing, we had the beer, we had the bar grub, we had the ambiance, but we didn't have you, Shane Metlin. We really needed you, man.
We'll make that happen at some point, somewhere.
Shane, we definitely did talk about you though, so you were there in spirit.
Okay.
And those were some amazing cheese curds, by the way.
They weren't bad. They weren't bad. All right. Well, you know what? There's probably some things going on in the Sun Belt that we should talk about. And Shane, from what I understand, ULM's getting a new AD. Have you heard this news?
I've heard this news. I heard hints of this news before it even happened.
Yeah, you know what?
I think you might have heard it too.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can smell it in the ether a little bit, and now it's come true. Dusty, do you have any scoop on this? Do you have any confirmation on this? Do you have any inside analysis on this?
Most definitely. It's going to be the former Utah State athletic director, John Hartwell, by way of Troy University. He was there from 2012 to 2015. While he was a guy that really got Troy put back on the map after they kind of slid there in the latter Larry Blakeney years. He was also the one that hired Chip Lindsey, which I think most Troy fans would cringe about. But we won't hold that against him as he comes to ULM looking to rebuild the athletic program for the Warhawks and put them back on the map. I like the guy. I think that he has the right vision. I think he has the right drive, and as a guy that can lead ULM to their second postseason appearance.
Yes, well, congratulations. I know what it's like not to have an athletic director in place, and to just feel like there's so much uncertainty with your program. What's going to be the vision of the future? What directions are you going to take? And do you anticipate him making any immediate moves?
I think he will. I mean, I think that there's so right now ULM has a soccer position open as well as volleyball, technically 3, with that volleyball position being indoor and the beach volleyball. So he's got some work to do. Obviously, budgeting is coming up as they are on fiscal year, so kind of winding down that and getting ready for next season. And then just making sure that everything's lined out and ready to go as we approach the summer months and kick off the 2023 season.
Well, I'm very excited for the Warhawks. But you know what? One thing he shouldn't tinker with, and I think Shane would agree, probably shouldn't tinker with that basketball program.
How about that double overtime win at Marshall? And I know Shane wants to focus on that James Madison game, and that's fine. We'll take that L, but you could tell our guys were just not fresh, not ready to roll. They were tired from having beat the better team in Marshall.
Oh, God. Shane, you don't have to take this. Oh my God. Are you going to take this from a Warhawk?
They had to be tired because I've made that drive from Huntington to Harrisonburg before. It's not an easy drive. You go through the mountains, you go through the wilds of West Virginia, forests, all kinds of stuff. And, who knows when they actually got into town after a double overtime game and then made the 4-hour drive. I think it's about 4 hours to Harrisonburg. It was snowing the next day in Harrisonburg. Yeah, that's a perfect example of the tough travel teams have to deal with in this conference. And yeah, they, maybe didn't quite have their legs towards the end of that game. JMU went on a late run. They led most of the way, but it was a late run that kind of put it away. That's a good Warhawks team. Seeing them in person, they're not deep, but their top 6 or 7 guys can play. And yeah, I don't know exactly what was going on early in the season, but they're legit. I've been waiting for them to come down, but I think they're legit contenders.
Well,
I think they were also playing over their head because they had one of the greats of ULM basketball, Nick Capola, in attendance at James Madison. He's up there in the Virginia area now. There was a picture on Twitter of him and head coach Keith Richard hanging out post game, whenever. If only he could have suited up, Jeremy. If only he could have suited up.
Then all your dreams would have finally come true. But you know what? It's also speaking of championship basketball. It looks like JMU. It looks like the Dukes maybe kind of shaking off whatever plagued them in the middle part of the year, coming up with some wins.
I think to some degree. I mean, we'll see how they do going on the road for a couple here this week. But I think to some degree, yeah, they're playing kind of what we expected. What they've done in their last 2 wins defensively on the perimeter. They've taken 2 guys who were just absolutely red hot coming in Josh Uduje, I think is how you pronounce it, from Coastal. He was scoring 25 a game for the past few coming in, had 2 when he came to JMU. They really shut him down. Blackman from ULM had just come off a 35-point game at Marshall, and I think double figures, like 8 of the past 9. And he came in and struggled a little bit. So that was kind of their defensive identity for a lot of the season, really since Mark Byington's got here. And it seemed to kind of go away for a little bit. But if they're bringing that back, that kind of pressure on the perimeter, then yeah, I think they have a chance to kind of turn it around and be in the mix by the time Pensacola gets here.
But, Shane, that's fine. I'm glad you guys, I'm glad the Dukes have figured it out. I'm glad that ULM Thibs is having a great season on the hard court. But right now, the top 2 teams, both 6-2, are Southern Miss and Louisiana. Louisiana seems like a team that's really getting on ahead of steam. It seems like Southern Miss is kind of maybe just kind of hanging in there. But it does seem to me that Louisiana is really chugging through. Are you guys getting that same sense?
Without a doubt. I mean, that was what Bob Marlin's 4 billionth career win or something like that they had here recently. Largest comeback win of his era. I like the Cajuns. I mean, I really do for the regular season. I think that they have what it takes down the stretch to get those wins. Kind of surprised though, it really hasn't been Jordan Brown being the guy that's leading the Cajuns.
Oh, yeah? Well, who's taking the conch?
Greg Williams has been really good. I mean, Jordan Brown still, I think, their leading scorer. But, yeah, Greg Williams has been really good of recent. The Lafayette kid making good when he comes home.
Oh, by the way, I said they were 6-2. They're 8-2. I'm not wearing my glasses. So you have to forgive me on that. Yeah. But, even though I said that Southern Miss feels like they're kind of clinging a little bit, it's still too late in the season to say they're a fluke, right? These guys are legit.
No, and yeah, Louisiana too. They're on this 8-game winning streak, but they got and they did beat Southern Miss in Lafayette, but they've got tough games coming up. They've got to go to Hattiesburg. They've got to play Marshall. They've got to go to Harrisonburg and play JMU. It's definitely not they definitely haven't clinched anything at this point, being tied with Southern Miss. And, that game in Hattiesburg is just going to be absolutely huge, probably absolutely nuts inside Reed Green, which I'm learning is a pretty intense environment. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that one here in a couple weeks.
All right, taking out James Madison, taking out ULM, Thibs, I'm going to name 3 teams, and you guys tell me which one of these guys are legit. Troy, Appalachian State, Georgia Southern.
Georgia Southern.
Georgia, of all those teams, it's Georgia Southern that's the legit team.
I think so, yeah.
All right, Shane, what you think?
I mean, if I was the kind of guy to cop out on something, I might say that they're all equally legit right now. But I won't do that. I'm going to go with Troy, just a hair above the other two. I'm more and more impressed with Appalachian State as time goes on, that they're, where they are. Sort of similar to ULM, they've got a good starting lineup, not maybe quite the same depth as some of these teams, but they're making do, and like ULM are really well coached. And like, it's hard for me to say one of them is more legit than the others, but I do think Troy's got a lot of athleticism. They've got, a home court advantage when they play there. I think Troy is probably going to finish on top among those 3, but nothing would shock me.
Troy's got Scott Frost too. He's a really good coach. Why do you say Georgia Southern, Thibs? What's it about Georgia Southern that you saw them like, yeah, those guys are legit?
2 players.
Okay.
Caden Archie.
All right.
And Andre Savrasov. I think is how you say it.
We'll give you a pass on that.
Averaging about 14 points a game and then about 7 rebounds. The guy's right on the cusp of having double doubles. And then Caden Archie averaging about 12 points a game. They can score. They are literally going out and beating opponents down, which is completely different from what we saw out of the previous Georgia Southern, where it was a defensive struggle, almost like App State, but a little bit more tame than that.
Okay. Well, you know what? You have made your case for Georgia Southern, and I'm impressed. Shane made his case for Troy, and it was well researched and well thought out. And I think what's funny though is I think all 3 of us would have picked somebody different. I would have picked the Mountaineers, maybe simply because they're the last team that's completely throttled Arkansas State. But I tell you what, Mountaineers just have a home court advantage that it just seems almost impossible to overcome.
Yeah, because you can't breathe when you're there.
I know. Yeah, Shane was talking about how hard it is to get to Marshall, but man, to get to Appalachian State, God, that's just as bad. So yeah, but I don't know. They've got a pretty tough team. I don't know if they've got the kind of team that makes it through the FunBelt tournament, but I guess we'll just have to see. Guys, is there any other news floating around that we need to discuss?
We have the return of Jay Hobson into the FunBelt Conference.
That happened today, right?
Yeah, the former Southern Miss head coach is now headed to be on Kane Womack's staff as the secondary coach for the Jaguars.
Yeah, welcome back to the Sun Belt. So once a belter, always a belter. That's what I have to say about that. I welcome him back to the fold. At Arkansas State, we had something called the State of the Pack, where we all got together and we talked a little bit about the future of Arkansas State, and it was kind of cool. It was people like the athletic director was there, the chancellor was there, and a couple of the head coaches was there, and also Sun Belt legend and A-State legend, Mario Davis, who now is an all-pro linebacker at New Orleans. He was there to announce that there was a new NIL collective that he was involved in running, and that was very exciting. So interesting things happening at Arkansas State, perhaps to catch up with the JMUs and Warhawks of the world.
It's not easy being cheesy.
So, Dusty, you know that from time to time, even though you and I and Shane were such experts at the Sun Belt and with the Group of Five, every now and then we have to bring in somebody who really knows, really understands, really has his hand on the pulse of Group of Five football. He's back with us for a third time. I can't believe he's here. I want to thank him for coming. Chris Vannini of The Athletic, welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
I am good. Good to be back here. Good to be in the off season. I'm doing pretty well.
I love having Chris Vannini on, but every time I see him, I get jealous of the beard. I can't deny it. I get jealous of the beard.
Yeah, I did trim it up today. It had gotten a bit uncouth.
Thibs, are you one of these guys that, despite your advanced age, you still can't grow a proper beard?
That is correct. I found that out during COVID when shaving was very optional. I think I went a month and a half, 2 months, and I basically looked like I hadn't shaven in about a week.
Well, I can't speak for Chris, but I can grow a thick, luscious beard in about, I don't know, maybe 4 days. That's all it takes for me. So I never understand you guys with your patchy beards and your inability to grow hair. It just seems out of whack for me. It seems like it should be something every grown man should be able to do. But speaking of grown men, Chris, you just got to put together a pretty cool article about Western Kentucky and how they handled their NIL or their sort of with a transfer portal seeking quarterback, Austin Hooper, right? Do I have the name right?
Austin Reed.
Where did I come up with Hooper? Oh, wait, that's the tight end for the that's somebody else. Yes, Austin Reed. Anyway, he tested the waters and came back to Western Kentucky. Why did he come back to Western Kentucky?
Yeah, so this was interesting because the transfer portal opens up, and then in early December, Reed goes in, and he at the time was the second leading passer in the country, had a huge year. 1 year after Bailey Zappi did the same thing there. And then a week after that, he withdraws and announces that he's staying. And I was like, well, that's interesting. What's up with that? And so I talked with him and some other people over the past month. And Western Kentucky had a few people stay. They had their top receiver stick around. One of their best defensive players also went in the portal, came out and stayed. Now, they did lose some guys. They had 5 guys go to Power 5 schools, but you don't see situations like that happen often at places like Western Kentucky. So I talked to people around. I was like, hey, what's the deal here? And I just found a really interesting approach to the transfer portal with Western Kentucky, which I think can be a model for the whole Group of Five. And it starts with, number one, have a place that people don't want to leave. That is difficult to leave. Again, Austin Reed, by the end of the year after the bowl game, led the nation in passing yards. Like, he did a pretty good job at Western Kentucky. There's a reason you would want to stay there. Number two, find some way to do some sort of NIL work with the players. It doesn't have to be the most amount of money. You're not going to win bidding wars, but do something. You got to show some sort of way that these players can be appreciated on these campuses in these Group of Five programs. And Tyson Helton, the head coach, very open and honest with guys. And he's like, hey, I'll let you know what places I think are good or not good. And just everything's very open. It's a give and take. Western Kentucky took the whole Houston Baptist offense the previous year, Bailey Zappi and all those guys. So he understands it. He gets it. Hey, I'm going to lose guys, but I'm going to take guys too. So let's just be honest about the whole thing. I just found the whole thing very refreshing.
Well, one of the reasons why I brought it up, Chris, is I do know that my alma mater, Arkansas State, has had a really hard time getting their stuff together, getting their ducks in a row when it comes to putting together an NIL program. In fact, they're just now finally kind of pulling stuff together and getting it going. Do you find that the Group of Five is doing a pretty, I don't know, maybe a bad job at keeping up with this sort of this new trend, this new way of life in college football?
Every place is different, but I think it's not a coincidence that a handful of places that are doing a good job are the same places that are holding on to players or getting really good players or getting players. That includes Tulane, which has the Fear the Wave collective. It's done a solid job of trying to get some deals for some players. And Michael Pratt, the quarterback, another guy who had Power 5 interests, announced on their podcast that he was going to stay at Tulane another year. You had Frank Harris at UTSA announced he was going to come back for another year at UTSA while announcing a new UTSA collective. And SMU, they have a lot of money, and as a result, they've got the number one group of 5 transfer class coming in. So it can be done. It's a lot harder. There's less money involved, but having some sort of organization, having something you can provide to players goes a long way. It doesn't always have to be a bidding war. That's the biggest thing I learned from this. Yeah, there are some kids who will go for the most money for sure, but not everybody's like that. People, if they're at a good spot, you want to give them a reason to stay.
Well, in your article, Austin Reed had said, yeah, he kind of made it sound like, well, he just wanted to dip a toe, see what kind of offers were coming in, and he got a few offers, decided to stay at Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky really can't be a place, as far as I know, that can just build a huge NIL collective. You had said earlier, there's also something about just building a program no one wants to leave. What's harder, building the collective or building a program that no one wants to leave?
Probably building the program. I think winning is difficult, and winning consistently is even harder. That's why coaches get fired all the time. So it's definitely harder to do that. And it is a credit to Tyson Helton, who has reshaped that program several times in like 4 years that he's been there, I think. He won 9 games, I think, maybe his first year. Then he had a kind of a not so good year. Then he has Bailey Zappi and everything. They lose him. They lose the offensive coordinator, bring in a new QB, new offensive coordinator, have another really good year. Now they got to find another offensive coordinator again. So it's a credit to the job that Tyson Helton has done there. And I mean, the Western Kentucky Collective, it's a local realtor and it's a local attorney. They're the ones who put it together. They talk to the people at Tennessee. They talk to other places to figure out kind of how to put it together. But it's just some guys in town that have some money that really like WKU. And they put the work in to put it together and got a couple deals for some of these guys. Again, it's very much not the biggest thing in the world, but it's the thought that counts.
Who doesn't love Big Red though? But do you feel that we've kind of seen coaches and administrators starting to push back on the NIL deal, where recently even Bama, Saban talked about a guy that was a defensive back wanting $800,000 to be able to sign with Alabama. He had another player that left wanting $500,000 and his girlfriend a guaranteed spot in law school. I mean, are we getting to a point where the coaches and administrators are even kind of saying enough's enough?
I'm really sick of hearing from coaches on this issue, especially someone like Nick Saban, who makes $10 million. Look, if that kid wants $800,000 and he can get it somewhere, then good for him, man. Like, and given the money that is going out to these players, the $13 million deal that the Florida recruit Jaden Rashada signed, and then the Florida people had to pull back on and basically cancel it. I don't blame these kids for asking certain places that they want money. A place like Alabama, they probably don't need to win the bidding wars, so to speak, because they can say, look, we get 10 guys drafted in the NFL draft every year. Like, that's their biggest selling point, more than anything else that Alabama needs to do, as opposed to maybe some other places that Nick Saban has called out before. You've got coaches who throw out stories, throw out numbers that are just not true. Administrators, I think, generally have a better sense of it. It was just the other day, I forgot, some coach, the D1 Ticker newsletter, some coach had thrown out, said, hey, kids want these big amounts of money. In the same newsletter, you had the Tulane AD saying, don't believe anything you hear about the numbers. A lot of those things are just completely inflated, and because there isn't a transparent market. It's just what you hear, what could be. It's not an open thing. So I don't really care about the complaining from everybody, especially at the Power 5 level. Any notion that NIL is taking money that's away that would be going to the athletic department instead is not really happening at that kind of level. So it's just, it's kind of it's a lot of people complaining for some legit, some not legit reasons. But when it comes to coaches in NIL, I'm generally not believing a thing they say anymore.
Well, I'll follow that up with a question about a coach here locally, Kurt Signetti at JMU. What he did say about NIL that I found interesting here recently was more not about like numbers or anything like that, but just sometimes he looks at the timing of when a guy decides to enter the portal and then judges based on that, like what they're actually looking for, whether it's an NIL deal, whether it's playing time, whether it's whatever. Do you see that? Is that a legitimate statement from a coach at this point?
By that, do you mean like guys going in or announcing their places, their new homes quickly?
Or like somebody who's been hanging around, this whole winter, and then a couple days before the portal closes up, they decide to kind of just toss their name out there, see what's available. They've seemingly been happy where they are, but maybe they've heard these numbers tossed around, and now they're looking for something. And in at a place like JMU, they're not looking for those guys.
Look, it's interesting because like tampering is technically not a thing you can do. At the same time, everybody basically agrees, hey, if you're going to go in, you should know, where you're going to be pretty quickly. So a lot of guys, yes, there is tampering. The ones that go in later are either someone convinced them to go in later, or they don't know what's going to happen when they get in. And those are the kids who get left behind more often than not. And that's a very difficult situation for them. That's, again, why I thought the way that Tyson Helton handled it at Western Kentucky was especially interesting, which was like, I'll call up the schools to see how much space they have. Like, I want to give you the realistic information because I don't want you to leave if you shouldn't leave. There are schools that if a guy enters the portal, they're frozen out of the program. Like, you're not with us anymore. You're out. Like, if you're in the portal, you're not with us. That is not how Western Kentucky handles it. And the way Tyson Helton said it was, every day that they're still here is another day that I have a chance to retain them. So even guys in the portal planning to leave practiced and played in Western Kentucky's bowl game where they blew out South Alabama. And I think that transparent process helps everybody involved. And that was one of my takeaways from that.
So one of the things that you had said too is that Western Kentucky, the guys, the staff there, they kind of asked around it. I think you mentioned that Tennessee kind of gave them some pointers. Is that right?
The guy runs a collective at Western Kentucky. He asked the Tennessee collective people like how to create a collective. That's what the Tennessee part was.
Yeah, I'm kind of seeing that in Arkansas State where there's a little bit of we're not quite sure how it works, and there's a little bit of fumbling and stumbling. Why isn't there just a standard template for people to follow? Why does it seem like it's so fractioned, people doing it in different ways? Is it state laws that maybe get in the way? Is it NCAA rules? Is it just programs being secretive? Why isn't it there more of a uniform approach to this?
Part of it is state laws. Every state is different in what is allowed. Part of it is some people really, really want to make sure they go by the books with NCAA rules and make sure they're not breaking anything. Others are less so concerned about NCAA rules and will just kind of do whatever and dare something to happen. I think you can look at the way John Ruiz, the Miami booster, talks about the way he handles NIL on Twitter, just pretty openly. He's like, all right, it's just being run differently. And so that's what it is. I mean, the NCAA, it is weird because everybody kind of agrees it'd be easier if this was all in-house, if the schools basically did it themselves, if maybe there was a clearinghouse so everybody could see what the market looks like. But that would require the NCAA allowing schools to kind of pay players, and that's not where it's at. So we're still in that weird middle ground here where 5 years from now, it's not going to be how it is right now. And so people are still trying to figure it out, trying to figure out if the NCAA will ever penalize anybody for this stuff. And so different people have different approaches.
So as we bring it back into the Sun Belt, 2022, I think that me personally, I feel like it was almost a little bit of a letdown of the season, despite 7 teams in the postseason, week 2 with upset after upset after upset. On the outside looking in, how did you feel this year for football went for the Sun Belt Conference?
It was completely flipped from what I expected. I didn't expect Appalachian State to be down like that. I didn't expect Troy to be so up like that. I didn't expect Louisiana to be so down. I didn't expect James Madison to be so up. It was like everything that I thought going in completely flipped differently. And, ultimately, the league had a top 25 team in Troy, which is a great spot for the league. But I think ultimately you want to be in contention for that New Year's 6 spot at the end of the year. We thought this could be the year for the Sun Belt, especially after, those big wins early in the season, the non-conference wins. And it didn't transpire. App State beats Texas A&M, but they don't even go to a bowl game, and Texas A&M is terrible. So I still think it was a year that still showed the depth of the conference for Southern Miss to make a bowl game, for South Alabama and Troy to rise up, for Georgia Southern to make a bowl game, bouncing back, Marshall winning 9, James Madison winning 8. I mean, right there, 3 of your 4 additions reached a bowl game. So I think it's still a step forward for the league. It just, the big names we expected to be the big names didn't happen. And when that happens in a group of 5 league, you're kind of playing catch up because no one expected Troy and South Alabama to carry the conference. And so it takes the rest of the country a period of time to kind of accept that, as opposed to an Appalachian State who we're all used to.
And maybe that's why I felt like the year was kind of off, was that we didn't have the quote unquote name brand teams that we're used to seeing atop the standings. I think we on this show, as close as we follow the Sun Belt Conference, we knew that it was going to be a championship team from the West side that was one of the Alabama schools. And really that battle for the belt was going to be the difference, with the East still kind of being the wide open race, which I think even when we met up in New Orleans for Sunbelt Media Days, it was the complete opposite. We were like, okay, it's App State in the East, the West is wide open. And really, as you said, the whole script was flipped.
Yeah, and the power has shifted very quickly in this conference. The East is obviously deeper, but suddenly Troy and South Alabama are the class of the conference, with a coach in his first year, and John Summerall, a coach in his second year, and Kane Womack. And I think, once again, those two will be among the best next year as well. And Southern Miss is on the rise. So, it's a lot more balanced than we thought. I mean, the Sun Belt is sticking with divisions, and they're the only conference that has said they're going to do that. Every other conference in the country is probably getting rid of divisions at some point. And so it's like, well, why would the Sun Belt do that? The East is so much better than the West. Well, maybe that's not the case after all.
I agree with you on that. Chris, I have a broader question. It's in the same way that it reflects upon the Sun Belt. Did you feel like there was maybe a little backlash or rubber band effect towards the group of 5 in general? It just seemed like the group of 5 had such a hard time breaking into the top 25, definitely getting into the top 15. It seemed like the year before there were all sorts of storylines involving programs in the group of 5 making waves in the polls, and it just didn't seem to happen this year. Is this just a down year for the group of 5, or is this the sort of the powers that be trying to make an adjustment?
It was a down year because, App State faltered early. Boise State started 1-2 or something like that. And Cincinnati lost in week 1 to Arkansas. So, a lot of the big names stumbled early. And it's what I said before, where the group of 5 always has to play catch up. If it's not the same teams. If Cincinnati, they can have a big year, UCF can do it for a couple of years in a row. The teams that we expected to be good were not. It took a long time for people to believe in Tulane. It took a long time for people to believe in Troy, in UTSA, and a lot of these schools. I mean, up until almost the final regular season, when Tulane played Cincinnati, I think in the final regular season game, I wasn't sure if I believed in Tulane either, And then 2 games later, they beat USC in the Cotton Bowl. So it takes time when it's unexpected teams and not teams that had done it the year prior. And that's what happened here. It was a bit of a down year, especially to start. But by the end of the year, I think teams figured themselves out. It was just kind of too late for a lot of people to notice.
Yeah, and it didn't help for the Sun Belt, Tibbs, right? When Marshall sort of starts tanking after beating Notre Dame, and then Appalachian State starts tanking after beating Texas A&M, and then just not quite getting that group. But yeah, I think Houston was regarded as this top tier team early on, and they just didn't pass muster either. I think that really hurt as well. Chris, is there anything coming up in the off season that you're really putting your focus on?
Just general, the way I approach the off seasons is like try to get into something new. I'm going to maybe try to like get a better understanding of X's and O's or stuff like that. I'm going to try to meet with more people in person and stuff like that. But like one of my next stories is going to be like, all right, what is like the future of the Mountain West? They got a new commissioner now. Second commissioner in the history of the conference. They may lose San Diego State to the Pac-12. Like, just where do things stand there? So, like, that's one of my things I'll have coming up soon.
See, I figured that you would spend your entire summertime just following professional wrestling. I know that you love wrestling a lot. And I figured maybe you would take a deep dive into getting into wrestling.
WrestleMania is the beginning of April. It's Final Four weekend, and I usually end up taking kind of the 2 weeks prior to that. At least I did last year, just writing wrestling stuff, and I realized I missed like a good chunk of spring practice when I did that. So I got to figure out how to balance that this spring.
So as you talk about the future of the Mountain West, there's the potential of it expanding to the G6 with the ASUN and whatever the other conference is, looking at moving up to FBS. Do you think that has any kind of impact on the G5 as a whole, like kind of diluting the talent, spreading out the message a little too thin and impacting the Sun Belt at all?
No, because I don't think it's going to happen. In talking with people at the NCAA convention, talking with people involved with the WAC ASUN, I was like, okay, what exactly are you guys trying to do here and why? And primarily, they want to create an FCS football conference because they don't have enough members individually. They've combined for the last couple of years as a football thing, and they got a waiver to have an automatic qualifier for the playoffs. They basically want to formalize that, make a football-only conference, so they'll have an automatic bid to the FCS playoffs every year. And that makes complete sense. That's fine. Totally get that. Makes sense. The idea of moving up to FBS, nobody knows how it's supposed to happen. Even the people involved. I asked Oliver Luck this. I was like, how do you do this? And he's like, well, there's nothing that says you can, but there's nothing that says you can't. So you basically got to figure that out. The people in FCS that I talked to don't buy it. Nobody in the group of five is open to it at all, and possibly sharing any college football playoff money with them for that. So I don't know. And I can tell you there are several schools in that group that are absolutely not ready for FBS at all. Oliver Luck is going to spend the next 6 months visiting all 10 schools, kind of doing an audit to see where things are at, and then go from there. And they'll probably determine that some of them are not ready to move to FBS. And like I asked people at North Dakota State, I was like, hey, if this can happen, are you interested? And they were like, no, because if we could do that, we would just move up with the Missouri Valley Football Conference. Like, one of the really strong FCS conferences. If a conference can just move up, then that's how it would happen. So no, nobody really believes this can happen. I am going to continue to talk with more people on it and write something on it. But my basic view of it is it's going to be an FCS conference, and that makes sense. Certain people are trying to push the FBS thing to happen, and it seems extremely unlikely.
We talked about kind of the status this year of Sun Belt Conference. Success means there's going to be turnover. We'll have two new coaches coming into the Sun Belt Conference, with Tim Beck at Coastal Carolina and the other one being G.J. Kinney coming to Texas State. What are your thoughts on those hires and kind of where they what do they do for those programs?
Kinney's interesting at Texas State. because, they talked to Kinney and they talked to Eric Morris, the guy who built Incarnate Word before Kinney took it over. And ultimately, what would Kinney, the young guy who took Incarnate Word to the FCS semifinals, and I'll say that he is doing something that was desperately needed at that school, and that was getting back to Texas high school football. The last couple of years with Jake Spavital going all in on transfers just wrecked the perception of that program among high school coaches. And so Kinney has spent a lot of time working to rebuild that, and I think that is working. They brought over a lot of the Incarnate Word players to Texas State, so we'll see how that plays out, but definite positive momentum there. Tim Beck at Coastal, I don't know. I mean, there hasn't been much on his resume recently that's really jumped out as amazing. He's kind of been a journeyman assistant coach at a lot of schools, at a lot of big name schools, where he did okay, not great, but okay. So the Coastal people really, really liked him. He's got Grayson McCall back. So we'll see. We've seen boring hires work out before. Look what Jonathan Smith has done at Oregon State. I don't think anybody really saw that coming, so quickly. Guy who's not a big name, but just a guy who's been kind of solid. So I always hate saying hires are absolutely not going to work or anything like that, because we never know. All the time we get these coaching grades wrong. So we'll see. We'll see about Coastal.
Do you think Jamie Chadwell is still pissing Till even in Liberty?
Well, he cut his hair, and I'm sure everybody around that coaching staff now will be a bit more buttoned up than they were before. So I don't know the color of the piss at that point, but the dude tripled or quadrupled his salary by going from Coastal to Liberty, even if it's Group of 5 to Group of 5, even if it's Sunbelt to Conference USA. Clearly, he was not getting the Power 5 interest that he thought he should, that I think he should. And so he's going to do Liberty. He's going to make a lot of money. He's going to be more buttoned up, and maybe that'll be enough to impress Power 5 schools.
God works mysterious ways that way.
Especially at Liberty.
So, anybody have any more questions for Chris Vannini?
Yeah, let me ask you. About, you didn't write this, but I saw you tweet it the other day about story from The Athletic about networks trying to find the balance between their streaming, their linear deals, what goes on where. I just want to get your opinion on that from a Group of 5 standpoint more than anything. It was such a huge deal for all these teams that joined the Sun Belt in the past year to have everything on ESPN Plus. But also they like linear TV. Just where do you see things going for a Group of 5, and what does it all mean for a Group of 5 as they try to figure out this balance?
I think it was a key signal from what Conference USA did with their media deal, which was we're going to be with CBS Sports Network and ESPN. We're getting rid of some of the stadium stuff, the beIN Sports, the Facebook, all that stuff, like ESPN. We want to be on ESPN, and we're willing to do midweek games in October to get on ESPN television. I'm somebody who still has cable. And for a while, that was enough to get every game. That is no longer the case. Now you have to pay for things like ESPN Plus and whatnot. And ultimately, I think the Group of 5 schools, for the most part, feel like college sports fans know ESPN Plus is a place to go to get everything. I don't know about the Pac-12 and Amazon because there's no other college football there over on Amazon. Having it under the ESPN umbrella makes it easier to find, makes it easier to just know there's one place to go to find the games. And that is such a big issue for Group of 5 fans is, where is the game? What do I watch the game on? Well, now you've got the American is ESPN only. The Sun Belt is ESPN only. The MAC is ESPN with some of it kind of sold off to CBS. And now Conference USA is CBS and back with ESPN. The Mountain West is the only one that's not. The Mountain West is with Fox and with CBS. And they've leaned heavily on linear television and not streaming because they felt that is still the way to go. Their deal's up in like 3 years, so they'll kind of have to figure out what to do after that. But exposure. I think it's ultimately about exposure and just, can you watch the games? The money is not going to be so incredible at the Group of 5 level that you got to do one over the other. You just want people to see your games. And that still seems to be the key going forward. It's not a Big Ten situation where you're willing to leave ESPN to go to NBC and CBS and Fox or whatever. But even the reason they did that, there's more exposure for the Big Ten. You're on network television every major window on college football Saturdays in the future. So the biggest thing is still just getting your games in front of people.
Chris Vannini, thank you for coming onto the show. You're a lead writer at The Athletic. How can we get a hold of you? What can we get? How can people get in touch with you?
Just at Chris Vannini on Twitter is the best place to find everything on there.
Chris Vannini is a great Twitter follow, especially if you want to know a little bit about the Group of 5, about college football, or about pro wrestling, which is where I get all my pro wrestling information from. Thanks, Chris, for being on the show, and we hope to have you again real soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Now, that was Chris Vannini, and as always, we peppered him with some different directions, right? Some different topics, and he was on top of them all. So it's always good to have Chris and his bearded visage on the show to give us some insight into the Group of 5 and how things are going. We mentioned, or I mentioned, Arkansas State's NIL efforts, the NIL collective that they've put together. And it's kind of the same way as Western Kentucky's. It was started by two guys, well-to-do guys, well-connected guys in Jonesboro. They brought in a couple other guys. Interestingly enough, also brought in Demario Davis to he's a board member too. So they're a little bit behind the 8 ball because they're a little bit behind on this. I don't know where JMU and the Warhawks are on this, but I do know Arkansas State's a little bit behind and playing some catch up. Where are the Warhawks on this, Dusty?
No official collective, no official NIL. A couple of guys do have individual agreements. I know, like Boogie Knight was selling some T-shirts with Nighttime and things like that. But overall, nothing really official with ULM. With the new athletic director coming in, John Hartwell, though, he knows that it's part of the landscape of sports and something that he has committed to trying to get that together and get it ready to go.
Would not be surprised if that was his first order of business. Shane, how the Duke's doing it?
I think, they're a little behind too, probably. You see some individual things, after the season, there were multiple football players who did, a meet and greet at a car dealership type of thing. You see some of that, but as far as like getting a collective or anything going on, I think there's some work going on behind the scenes, maybe with some semi-retired former athletic department employees trying to get something going, but nothing necessarily that's locked down at this point. But I think it's something they definitely are looking for, because you can't fall behind with that.
So, Arkansas State, it's where the Red Wolves run in packs, right? So our NIL collective is called Impact.
Speaking of NIL deals, Jeremy, we have long discussed it.
Yeah.
We sent out tweets about it.
Oh, wait.
We have.
Okay.
Our first FunBelt podcast NIL deal with a student.
Is it Grayson McCall? It's Grayson McCall, isn't it?
No, he did not return phone calls.
Okay. All right. I would have liked Grayson McCall, but whoever it is, it's going to be the best. He or she will be an outstanding ambassador for FunBelt podcast. Are we announcing today? Or are we announcing next week?
Next week. They'll debut next week.
Next week is the big announcement. I'm looking forward to it. It's not Grayson McCall, though, right? You're saying it's not him.
That is correct.
Okay. Is it like is it Grayson McCall?
Still no.
Okay. That's all right. But I think we've come to the portion of the show where we do, and I've gotten a little bit better at this, Tibbs. You invented this. It's plugs, promos, and parting shots. Did I get the order of that correct?
Yeah, for once.
I don't even have notes. It's come to my head. And Shane, I'm going to make you go first for the plug, promo, or parting shot.
Yeah, I'll plug as always, dnronline.com/sport/Sunbelt Extra. You want to read about all the kind of stuff we talk about on here, read what Noah and I write on a daily basis. Parting shot. I've got my one eye on my phone watching the AFC Championship game as my Chiefs see what they can do, see if they can avoid losing to Cincinnati yet again. But, kind of interesting as we talked to Chris about the landscape with the streaming versus linear and all that stuff. Like, does anything sum up today's media more than sitting in my basement recording a podcast while I got one eye on a game on my phone? And I don't know.
That sounds about right. I think are we overstimulated in a way, Shane, that you and I can be putting out together a piece of media while absorbing other media at the same time? Is it too much?
It might be. But be sure to click and link and subscribe to the FunBelt podcast anyway.
Absolutely.
If you have to pick one thing, that's what you got to listen to.
All right, Tibbs, can you top that?
Warhawk Report, always the latest on ULM information. My parting shot, drove to Monroe for the press conference, as we've said. Dude, driving in the rain sucks. And people in Texas do not know how to drive in the rain, which surprises me. But then again, they've been invaded by Californians that don't know how to drive in the rain. But that's a whole nother conversation.
Is that a parting shot? You took
Yes.
a parting shot at California drivers
That are now in Texas, yes.
Okay. I can see that. All right, that's good. Thanks. That was there was a plug, a promo, and a parting shot in that. I like that. For me, you can always read my stuff on howraiser.com. It's coming to that time of year where, you sort of have to scrounge for content. But I'm sure I'll find something to amuse you. I want to say, guys, my parting shot is that do you guys pay attention to Oscars, the Academy Awards?
Not in the least bit.
Not really.
Did we win one?
Yeah, I think we're up for one. No, I don't really either. I don't watch the award show. I will pay attention to see what movies have been nominated. And a lot of times it's movies I haven't watched. And as usual, the list of movies came out and I had maybe watched 2 of them. So my wife and I would decide to watch 2 of the nominated movies. And I was going to let you know if they were any good. One of them was Banshees of Inisherin, which is this really sort of bitter. It sort of starts off as a comedy, but then gets real dark and real sad. You should check it out. It stars Brendan Gleeson and a couple other guys you'll know. A bunch of Irishness goes on. It's probably the most Irish movie you'll ever see. I give it 5 fingers. It's really good. Check it out. And then the second movie we saw was Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. Shane, have you seen this movie? This seems like a movie that'd be up your alley.
I haven't seen very many movies recently at all, but
this movie, it stars Michelle Yeoh, and she's a sort of this average every woman in tax trouble, and then it just becomes like this madcap, almost unexplainable, unimaginable series of events that you can't put your finger on. You don't know what's going on. It's about 2 hours of going, what the hell is this? I haven't been this befuddled since I watched The Green Knight a couple of years ago. This movie is off the rails. I think it's good, but you guys got to see it for yourselves. You guys go see it. I think it's earned the most Oscar nominations this year. I don't know if it deserves them, but you should check it out. And that's my parting shot, guys. We've got another great show. It wasn't like the most in-depth show, but we got Chris Vannini in. We got to talk a little bit about Sunbelt basketball. We talked a lot about NIL, which I'm still a little confused on, but I'm actually getting my handle on it. And then we had some great parting shots. Guys, could we ask for a better show?
Yes, we could.
Absolutely. Yeah, it could be less of a sausage fest. We could have more ladies on the show with a better perspective. We could have some more star power, perhaps. Maybe we can discuss more than just sports. We're more well-rounded than that. We can discuss philosophy, politics. We can discuss art and poetry. What do you say, guys?
No, I'm good with just sticking to the Fun Belt.
Yeah. I couldn't say much about poetry.